The first time Evelyn Mercer let her friends finish her sentence for her, I realized I had already lost something far more dangerous than the relationship. I had lost my place inside her private version of reality. And the worst part was that she looked relieved when she said it. We were sitting on the covered terrace of a country club in Greenwich, Connecticut, where everything smelled faintly of rain, polished wood, and money that had been old long before either of us was born. A waiter had just placed 2 untouched glasses of sparkling water between us. Evelyn folded her hands in her lap, glanced once toward the dining room where her friends were laughing near the bar, and said, "My friends and I decided you're not ambitious enough for me." I remember the exact way she said friends, not as a group of people who cared about her, as a committee that had reviewed my application and found me insufficient. I looked at her for a moment, then I said, "I understand." She blinked like I had skipped a line in a script she had rehearsed all afternoon. She had expected confusion, maybe an argument, maybe pain dramatic enough to prove I still needed her approval. Instead, she got calm. And calm has a way of making people hear themselves clearly. Evelyn leaned back in her chair and crossed one leg over the other. She was beautiful in the exact way people in that part of Connecticut respected most. Controlled, elegant, expensive without appearing to try. Her ivory blouse had probably cost more than the monthly car payment on my first apartment after graduate school. She kept her eyes on me, but I could feel the attention from the bar drifting in our direction. Her friends were pretending not to watch. They made it worse. Or maybe better. It meant this moment had an audience, and audiences expose motives faster than private rooms do. "Daniel," she said, softening her voice, "I don't mean that cruelly. That sentence usually comes right before cruelty with better manners." I nodded once. I know. At 29, I was a senior operations manager for a logistics technology company in Stanford. I worked long hours. I made good money. I had no debt except a mortgage on a modest townhouse I had bought 2 years earlier, alone, after saving for nearly a decade. I was not reckless. I was not glamorous. I was not the kind of man who posted private jet photos from borrowed weekends and called it vision. Evelyn came from a family that had never needed to explain the difference between wealth and income because they had always possessed both. Her father chaired a private equity firm. Her mother sat on museum boards and remembered people's weaknesses the way other people remember birthdays. Evelyn worked in brand strategy for a luxury beauty group in Manhattan, and she was excellent at it. Sharp, disciplined, socially fluid. She could enter a room full of strangers and leave with 3 invitations, 2 numbers, and 1 person quietly wondering whether they had just been measured and dismissed. We had been together for 16 months, long enough for real habits to form, not long enough for illusion to collapse on its own. The early version of us had looked almost sophisticated. We met at a charity auction in Westport through a mutual acquaintance from Yale's alumni network. Though I had only attended Yale for business school, and she carried her Princeton degree like a polished family heirloom. She liked that I listened carefully. I liked that she never wasted words. For the first 6 months, our differences felt complementary. She pulled me toward rooms I might never have entered. I steadied her in moments when performance exhausted her more than she admitted. But somewhere around the 9th month, the gap between taste and values began to show, not in one explosion, in small edits. She started correcting the words I used when I talked about work. She preferred growth over stability, scale over process, founder energy over institutional competence. She said those things as if they were obviously superior, like eye contact or clean water. The first time she mentioned that I should think bigger, we were driving back from a dinner in Darien. I asked what she meant. She smiled and said, "You manage things well, Daniel. But do you ever want to build anything people can't ignore?" It sounded harmless then. It even sounded motivating. But over time I realized she did not mean build a meaningful life. She meant build a life visible enough to silence comparison. There's a difference. At first I defended her to myself. Everyone absorbs a little social pressure. Everyone performs around the people whose judgment shaped them. But then I met the full orbit around her. Sloan Whitcomb, whose fiancé talked about launching a fund the way missionaries talk about salvation. Margot Bennett, who introduced men by net worth before first name when she had enough champagne in her. Piper Langley, who treated every relationship like a merger that should increase lifestyle efficiency. They were not cartoon villains. That would have been easier. They were intelligent, polished, and often kind in shallow ways that make cruelty difficult to name. They complimented my suits. They praised my composure. They asked careful questions about my career, then reacted with almost invisible disappointment whenever my answers suggested discipline rather than spectacle. To them, ambition meant public velocity. If it could not be admired at a table, it barely counted. Before we go further, tell me this in the comments. When people say they want someone ambitious, do they mean character, or do they usually mean status they can display to other people? Because those are not the same thing, and confusing them destroys a lot of otherwise decent relationships. The first real fracture came in November. Evelyn invited me to a private dinner at her parents' home in Riverside. There were 12 guests, most of them family friends, all of them accomplished enough to speak in biographies without sounding arrogant. At one point, her father asked me whether I had considered leaving corporate life to start something of my own. His tone was civil, maybe even genuinely curious. I told him I had considered it, but I took entrepreneurship seriously enough not to romanticize it. I said I liked building reliable systems. I liked solving practical problems. I liked work that created durable value even when no one applauded. He nodded, but I saw Evelyn's expression change by half a degree. Later that night in the car, she stared out the window and said, "You made yourself sound smaller than you are." "No," I said. "I made myself sound accurate." She let out a breath. "That's exactly what I mean." I did not argue then. Maybe I should have. Maybe that was the night the future announced itself quietly, and I mistook quiet for harmlessness. December brought more of the same. She began talking about timelines. Not marriage exactly. Positioning. The apartment she wanted in Tribeca. The kind of couple trips her peers were taking. The schools people in our circle were already discussing for children they had not yet conceived. I listened, and each conversation left me with a strange feeling that my life was being reviewed by people who would never have to live it. Then came January, and with it a dinner party in Scarsdale that ended with Sloan asking me whether I planned to remain supporting cast in my own career. She said it with a laugh. Everyone laughed, even Evelyn. Not loudly, just enough. That tiny laugh stayed with me longer than the insult itself. On the train back, I asked her why she joined in. She said I was being sensitive. Then she said something even worse. They were pushing you because they see potential. That was when I understood something important. People who routinely humiliate you in the name of helping you do not actually care whether you grow. They care whether you submit. By February, I had stopped talking about my long-term plans around her friends. Not because I was ashamed, because I was tired of watching steady effort treated like a personality defect. What Evelyn never fully understood was that I did have ambition. It just lived in places that did not photograph well. I wanted to expand my team and move into regional strategy. I wanted to pay off my house early. I wanted to invest carefully, support my younger sister through law school without making her feel dependent, and eventually buy a larger home with enough quiet to make dinner feel like a refuge instead of a performance. I want a life I could still respect when no one was looking. But ambition that serves peace rarely impresses people addicted to comparison. The week before she ended things, I was up for a major promotion. Not flashy, not public, but meaningful. It would have put me on the track to director within a year. The work mattered, and I had earned it. I told Evelyn over dinner at a small place in New Canaan. She smiled and said that was wonderful. Then she asked, "And long-term?" I told her this was long-term. She looked down at her wine as if I had missed a larger answer. That silence told me more than any speech. So when she sat across from me on that terrace and delivered the verdict from her social board of directors, I was less shocked than I might have been 3 months earlier. What surprised me was not that she was ending it. It was that she had outsourced the moral authority for doing so. My friends and I decided. That sentence still interests me. Not because it was cruel, because it was revealing. Adults who cannot own their choices often borrow a chorus. It helps them avoid the loneliness of accountability. I looked toward the dining room. Sloan was pretending to study the dessert menu. Margot had turned her body halfway toward us. Piper kept lifting her glass without drinking from it. I faced Evelyn again. You should go join them, I said. She frowned slightly. That's it. I almost smiled. There are moments when a person is not asking a question. They're asking whether they still have power. That's it, I said. She picked up her handbag, then set it down again. Daniel, I did care about you. I know. You're not angry. I'm paying attention. That landed. Her jaw shifted. There it was. The first sign that she understood calm was not weakness. It was observation. I stood, placed my napkin on the chair, and wished her well. Then I walked past the bar on my way out. Not one of her friends met my eyes. People are often very brave when they believe they are judging a version of you that will remain seated. Outside, the rain had started in earnest. I sat in my car for a full minute before turning the key. Not because I was shattered, because I was reorganizing. There is grief, and then there is reclassification. The second one can feel colder. By the time I reached the Merritt Parkway, my sadness had narrowed into something more useful. Clarity. I did not call anyone that night. I did not drink. I went home, took off my jacket, and opened the note on my phone where I kept major decisions. I wrote one sentence. Do not return to places where your dignity depends on their mood. The next morning, Evelyn texted, I hope you got home safe. I looked at the message for a long time. Then I replied I did. Nothing else. An hour later, she sent another. I didn't expect you to be so detached. That word mattered. Detached. Not respectful. Not composed. Detached. To some people, a boundary feels like abandonment when they expected access to your emotional labor after injuring you. I did not answer. Over the next week, she kept finding reasons to reopen the connection. A sweater she had left at my place. Tickets for a spring gala we had planned to attend. A book of mine on her coffee table. All real things. None urgent. I arranged for a courier to send her belongings and asked the building concierge to receive the book. Clean. Polite. Finished. That should have been the end of it. But endings rarely stay private when pride is involved. 2 Fridays later, I learned from a mutual friend that Evelyn had been describing the breakup as necessary. That word did not bother me. What bothered me was the reasoning attached to it. She had apparently told several people that I was comfortable being average and that she could not build a future with someone who lacked drive. Normally, I would have ignored it. But reputations in certain circles move quietly and linger long after facts do. And because my work increasingly overlapped with investors, consultants, and board members who drifted through the same suburban social ecosystems, I understood that private contempt could become professional distortion if left unchecked. So I did something I had never done before. I protected the narrative, not with gossip, with presence. 3 days later, my company hosted a regional operations summit at a hotel in White Plains. Executives from New York and Connecticut attended. So did several outside partners, including a board advisor whose wife happened to be close with Margot Bennett. I led 2 sessions that day, one on supply chain resilience, one on post-merger systems integration. No fireworks, no viral founder misaleji, just command, preparation, and results. Afterward, our COO asked me to stay late for a private conversation. He offered me the promotion, Director of Operational Strategy, effective in 6 weeks, pending formal board approval. The salary was strong. The equity package was better than expected. I thanked him, shook his hand, and sat alone in my office afterward for nearly 10 minutes. Not because I needed to celebrate, because I wanted to feel the weight of what steady work can do when no audience is grading its glamour. That weekend, word traveled. I did not spread it. I did not need to. In those communities, good news moves fastest when it complicates someone else's opinion. By Monday, I received a message from Piper. Congratulations. Huge move. The tone was light, but the timing was surgical. The next day, Sloan viewed my LinkedIn profile twice. By Thursday, Evelyn texted, I heard about your promotion. That's amazing. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then put the phone face down on my desk. She wrote again that evening. Maybe I misread where you were heading. That was the midpoint where something inside me changed. Not because I suddenly felt vindicated, because I saw the mechanism clearly. My value had not changed. Her interpretation had. And it had changed only once my trajectory became socially legible to the same audience that had helped dismiss me. That is not love discovering depth. That is perception catching up to optics. I answered the next morning. I'm glad you're doing well, Evelyn. I think it's best we leave things where they are. She responded within minutes. I wasn't asking to get back together. That sentence is often true only for the first 5 minutes. I wrote, understood. Take care. Then I archived the thread. A week later, I ran into her at a fundraiser in Manhattan. I had debated whether to attend, but my company sponsored one of the education initiatives being honored, and my absence would have been noticed. She was standing near the silent auction display in a navy gown, speaking to an older couple I recognized from Darien. When she saw me, her expression changed in a way I still find difficult to describe. Not regret exactly. Recognition. The kind that arrives when someone realizes the story they told about you no longer fits the room. We spoke for less than 4 minutes. She asked about work. I answered briefly. She said I looked well. I thanked her. Then she said, I think maybe I let other voices get too close to my own. It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. And because it was honest, I treated it seriously. That happens, I said. She studied my face as if searching for an opening. There wasn't one. I did love parts of what we had, she said. I know. And you? I could have lied to make the exchange cleaner. Instead, I told the truth. I loved who I thought you were when we were alone. She lowered her eyes. The music from the ballroom drifted into the hall between us. Some jazz arrangement too polished to offend anyone. Then she said, that's fair. Fair. Another revealing word. Not because it comforted me, because it meant she knew. She knew the damage was not in ending it. It was in letting a relationship become a referendum held by people who were never inside it. Before I continue, I want your honest take. If someone realizes too late that they let outside pressure shape how they treated you, do you think that self-awareness deserves a second chance? Or does insight come too late once respect is already gone? After that night, the contact stopped. Spring moved forward. My new role began in May. The workload intensified immediately, but so did my sense of alignment. I was traveling more between Connecticut, New York, and northern New Jersey, building systems that most people would never notice unless they failed. That suited me. There's a quiet satisfaction in being essential without being theatrical. My sister, Lauren Hayes, finished her second semester of law school and called one Sunday to tell me she had landed a clerkship for the summer. I sent her money for a better apartment near campus and told her it was an early birthday gift. She knew it was more than that. She also knew not to embarrass me by saying so. My townhouse felt different by June, less like a place I had defended, more like a place I had chosen. I repainted the office, replaced the dining chairs Evelyn had once called earnest, started cooking again instead of eating late over my sink with emails open. Sometimes recovery is not emotional theater. Sometimes it is buying furniture without imagining someone else's judgment attached to it. In late July, I learned through a mutual acquaintance that Evelyn had left her firm for a more senior role at a luxury hospitality brand. It fit her. I was not angry. I was not secretly waiting for her life to collapse so mine could feel justified. That is another fantasy people cling to after rejection. The hope that the other person must suffer for your pain to mean something. Real life is more complicated. She was still talented, still disciplined, still capable of building a striking life. The problem had never been that she lacked value. It was that she had confused judgment with discernment. And maybe, for a while, I had confused attention with intimacy. We saw each other one final time that autumn at a dinner hosted by a philanthropic board my company occasionally partnered with on community transport grants. No dramatic music, no cinematic pause, just two adults seated at opposite ends of a long table with enough candlelight to make everyone look kinder than they were. At one point during dessert, the chairwoman asked how I approached leadership under pressure. I answered the way I always do. I said I try to distinguish noise from signal, ego from need, and urgency from panic. A few people nodded. Across the table, Evelyn was very still. I did not know exactly what she felt in that moment, and I am careful not to invent emotions for people just because it flatters my narrative. Maybe she was merely listening. Maybe she heard an echo of everything she once dismissed because it did not sound grand enough at a brunch table. Maybe she was thinking about nothing at all. But after dinner, as coats were being collected, she stepped beside me near the foyer and said one final thing. "You were ambitious." I turned toward her. She gave a small, restrained smile that looked older than the one she wore when I met her. Just not in a language my world respected. For a second, I saw the truest version of her. Not the polished daughter, not the socially trained strategist. Just a woman smart enough to recognize the architecture of her own mistake after it had already cost her something she could not ask back for. I nodded once. That sounds right. Then I put on my coat and walked into the cold. No anger, no triumph, just completion. People talk a lot about heartbreak, as if the deepest wound is being unwanted. Sometimes it is not. Sometimes the deeper wound is being seen through a borrowed lens by someone you trusted to use their own eyes. And sometimes healing begins the moment you stop auditioning for respect in rooms that only understand spectacle. I was never unambitious. I was simply building a life that would still hold when the audience went home. That turned out to matter more than being chosen by someone who needed her friends to translate my worth. And in the end, the most important thing I said to her was the simplest. I understand. Because I did. I understood that love cannot survive where identity is negotiated by committee. I understood that calm confuses people who are counting on your collapse. And I understood that the right future often begins when the wrong person mistakes your steadiness for lack of fire.